Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from London. I'm Laura Macon-Isherwood, and in this bulletin I'll be giving you a quick update on stories from around the world. As the United States draws closer to a complete withdrawal of its troops from Afghanistan, fears of a resurgence of Islamic extremist group Al-Qaeda grow. Top Pentagon officials have warned of a renewed military threat to the US and its allies within 2 years of the withdrawal of troops. We'll get you more on that, but first let's take a look at the headlines. Ebrahim Raisi, a cleric fiercely loyal to the religious establishment, could win the Iran election, a contest being seen as a referendum against the current administration's handling of the nuclear deal. Top US military leaders, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Joint Chief of Staff General Mark Milley, highlight the threat still posed by Al-Qaeda as the US prepares to withdraw its troops from Global deaths due to the coronavirus reach 4 million, according to Reuters analysis. It took over a year for deaths to hit 2 million, while the next 2 million were recorded in just 166 days. Coronavirus cases surge in Moscow. Russia's capital records over 9,000 new COVID cases in the past 24 hours, forcing the authorities to extend curbs and close Euro fan zones. US President Joe Biden makes Juneteenth or June 19th a federal holiday, commemorating the end of slavery in the US under the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act. Iranians are all set to elect their next president. The race that started with 600 hopefuls is now down to 4 frontrunners. 60-year-old Ebrahim Raisi is being viewed as the potential winner. He is most likely to succeed the incumbent Hassan Rouhani. He is a hardline cleric who is close to the country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Khamenei had called Raisi a trustworthy and highly experienced person. Raisi has vowed to combat poverty and corruption. He lost his 2017 presidential bid, but managed to get 15 million votes. He was later appointed to head up the country's judiciary. However, Raisi is associated with one of the darkest moments of Iran's post-revolution history, the mass execution of Iranians in 1988. 64-year-old Abdullah Hamati will be challenging Raisi. He has served as the head of Iran's central bank under Rouhani. He has time and again described himself as an independent candidate. The technocrat drew attention for appointing his wife as one of his advisors. He says that he aims to decrease poverty by establishing better economic ties with the world. There are growing fears of low voter turnout, though. Iran has a population of 80 million. Out of this, 59 million people are eligible to vote. In 2017, Iran had registered a 73% voter turnout. However, a state-backed agency has predicted only 42% of people eligible will vote this year, which would be a historic low. Khamenei has cast his ballot in Tehran. He has warned of a foreign conspiracy. In a televised speech, Khamenei blasted media for what he called its grim portrayal of the poll. He warned that pressure from Iran's adversaries might increase if people do not step out to vote. He also criticised British and American media and accused them of questioning the election and weakening popular participation.
Speaking of our upcoming elections on Friday, it has been several months that American and British media and the mercenaries working under their flags are killing themselves to maybe question the elections and weaken the participation of people. They want to somehow make accusations against the elections in the Islamic Republic with all sorts of comments and remarks. If we want the pressure by enemies, including economic pressure such as sanctions and so on, to be removed or eased, the participation of the people should increase and our public support is shown to the enemies.
People in Tehran have mixed feelings about going out to vote. Their grievances include economic hardship, which got worse due to US sanctions, corruption, mismanagement and a crackdown on protesters in 2019.
خیر به خاطر اینکه اون کسی که من فکر می‌کنم بتونه تو این شرایط چون واقعا توی شرایط خیلی بغرنج مملکت ما بتونه نجات بده الان من توی هیچ کنم این آقایون نمی‌بینم که در واقع کسی باشه که بتونه از این شرایط ما رو در واقع نجات بده به این دلیل
به شخص من امید دارم ولی خب برای تغییر میتونی حالا یا شرکت کنیم یا نکنم ولی من خودم به شخص شرکت میکنم و شرکتم سعی میکنم عقلانی باشه تا احساسی.
There is deep concern among the military and the intelligence community over the complete withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan. Pentagon officials have flagged a heightened terror threat amid a resurgence of groups like Al-Qaeda. Our next report gives you details.
As the United States nears a complete withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan, top Pentagon officials have raised concerns over resurgence of terror groups. They say international militant groups like Al-Qaeda could pose a threat from Afghanistan to the US homeland and American allies in 2 years.
How would you rate the likelihood of international terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS regenerating inside of Afghanistan and presenting a threat to our homeland or our allies, given what you see today?
I would assess it as medium. I would also say, Senator, that it would take possibly 2 years for them to develop that capability.
Those that have worked with us.
Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, agreed and also said that there was a medium risk in the current scenario.
I concur with that, and I think that if certain other things happen, if there was a collapse of the government or a dissolution of the Afghan security forces, that risk would obviously increase. But right now, I'd say medium and in about 2 years or so.
They fear that Afghanistan could witness a full-scale civil war once the United States withdraws its troops. There are concerns over erosion of rights of women once the Taliban gets a share in power.
We, the military, are doing everything we can to ensure that those that have worked with us and those that remain are protected to the extent that we have that capability to do that. But realistically, if we're not there, we're going to have very limited impact on the protection of those that are still in Afghanistan. And if certain scenarios unfold, too early to tell if that's going to happen. But if they did, then yes, your concerns and everyone else's concerns about women and girls are justified.
United Nations report in January said that there was as many as 500 Al-Qaeda fighters in Afghanistan and that the Taliban maintained a close relationship with the Islamist extremist group. The latest statement from the Pentagon officials is a clear sign of concern in the military and the intelligence community. President Biden's decision to withdraw troops completely from Afghanistan has raised concerns that the country could witness a full-scale civil war, which could provide Al-Qaeda space to rebuild and plan new attacks. President Joe Biden had earlier said that the United States has the ability to keep an eye on any resurgence of Al-Qaeda without keeping a military footprint. United States has completed more than Afghanistan. While President Joe Biden had assured that all American soldiers would be home before the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attack.
The plan has long been in together, out together. U.S. troops as well as forces deployed by our NATO allies and operational partners will be out of Afghanistan before we mark the 20th anniversary of that heinous attack on September 11th.
There are reports that the Biden administration may achieve the target of complete withdrawal by 4th of July, the American Independence Day. Bureau Report WION, World is One.
Tensions are simmering between the US and North Korea yet again. This as North Korean leader Kim Jong-un announced that his country needs to prepare for both dialogue and confrontation with the United States. According to the state-owned Korean Central News Agency, North Korea has stepped up their action against Washington. Pyongyang has laid out a strategy for dealing with the newly inducted Biden administration. It wants to fully prepare itself for confrontation in what they called an attempt to protect its dignity and maintain peace in the state. Kim has issued the order during an ongoing ruling party meeting in Pyongyang. While there's no clarity about what steps Kim is going to be taking, experts have made an important observation. They believe he could launch provocative missile and other weapons tests in coming months to draw US attentions and boost his leverage ahead of possible new negotiations. US-North Korea relations have been strained after several nuclear negotiations between the nations have fallen apart, even after a series of high-stakes summit meetings. Right after Joe Biden assumed office in January, Kim threatened to enlarge his nuclear arsenal, targeting the US if it did not abandon what he called its hostile policy on North Korea. The Biden administration has adopted a so-called calibrated and practical approach towards North Korea's nuclear program. Kim's announcement comes after leaders of the Group of Seven Nations, or G7, issued a statement on North Korea earlier this week, calling for the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. They called on North Korea to engage and resume dialogue with the nations and also respect human rights conditions. Battling the Delta variant of coronavirus in the UK, Boris Johnson's government is determined to reach its target of giving at least one dose of vaccine to all adults by July the 18th. In a bid to push the inoculation drive, the UK has now opened up vaccinations for all above the age of 18. Here's a report.
The United Kingdom government has taken big steps to reach its target to give every adult one dose of COVID vaccine by July 19th. Health services in England opened up COVID-19 vaccinations to everyone aged above 18 years.
Everybody aged 18 and above can book their COVID vaccination. Already over 3 million people in their 20s have had their first jab, and so everybody tomorrow can now follow on their footsteps and get that protection, not only for you and your friends, but also for your neighbours, in a way that will keep us safe and hopefully give us back our summer.
Head of NHS England, Sir Simon Stevens, said if they continue on the course, they will be able to reach the July 19th target.
The NHS has delivered this vaccination programme at record speed, ahead of target for each of the milestones. We've got the vaccine coming online week by week now through the 19th of July, and as long as that continues to be the case, then we can offer every adult the vaccination that will protect not only them but their families, their friends and the country as a whole.
Earlier, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson pushed the June 18th reopening deadline by 4 weeks to July 19th. He said that the period will be used to push vaccination drive across the United Kingdom.
By Monday the 19th of July, we will aim to have double jabbed around 2/3 of the adult population, including everyone over 50, all the vulnerable, all frontline health and care workers, and everyone over 40 who received their first dose by mid-May. And to do this, we will now accelerate the second jabs for those over 40, just as we did for the vulnerable groups, so they get the maximum protection as fast as possible.
The Delta variant of coronavirus continues to remain a cause of concern in Britain. A study commissioned by the UK government found that COVID infections increased by 50% between May 3rd and June 7th. Scientists say that the exponential rise in case was driven by younger and mostly unvaccinated age groups. So far, over 42 million people, which is almost 80% of adults, have been given the first dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. Over half of the adults have received both shots. Pfizer, AstraZeneca and Moderna vaccines are being rolled out across the United Kingdom. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
In a significant development, the European Medicines Agency has spoken about the much talked about practice of mixing vaccine doses. The EMA says it will be unable to make specific recommendations regarding this as the body lacks sufficient evidence on its use. There have been reports suggesting that mixing different vaccines can be effective and beneficial. The level of evidence the EMA has, though, is fairly limited for the time being, it says, and close monitoring is needed to make any further announcement.
Yeah, so we are aware of the possibility of using an approach of mixing and matching different vaccines throughout the vaccination campaigns in the member states. And we have to say, and we already stated, that this approach is an approach that has been proven successful in the past in the context of the use of other vaccines, and is well known that mixing and matching vaccine often ends up in a better immune response. Now, we have so far limited evidence with respect to the COVID-19 vaccine about the option of mixing and matching them, but some preliminary studies have shown that indeed the immune response seems to be satisfactory, and no particular issues were emerging from a safety perspective. So it looks like it could be a strategy that could be employed, but of course there is limited evidence, and it's very important that we collect more information and monitor carefully.
The EMA representative also added that there was no suggestion that replacing the recommended second shot of an AstraZeneca vaccine with a messenger RNA would make it ineffective. And in another important announcement, the EMA has said that EU states must use all the vaccine options available to fight the coronavirus pandemic, and it is too early to tell if a particular type is best. This comes as several countries limit the use of so-called viral vector jabs like AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson due to a link with rare blood clots, and opt instead for messenger RNA vaccines like Pfizer and Moderna. An Associated Press investigation has found that at least 1,900 US military firearms were lost or stolen over the last decade. Here's a report.
These are the guns that are meant for war, but they end up on American streets. Albany District Attorney says that it is expected of any military base to have extremely tight provisions and to make sure that their weapons or any of the tools that are being used on those bases do not fall into the hands of criminals. But this is clearly not the case. Army pistols, machine guns and automatic assault rifles vanished from military armories and were used in violent crimes, including shootings and robberies.
I think it's frightening, the idea that on our military base, a weapon could in fact be stolen, and then that weapon could end up on an urban center anywhere in the United States.
Security lapses included unlocked doors, sleeping troops, and a surveillance system that didn't record. The Pentagon and armed services have justified the situation, saying that the missing firearms are a tiny fraction of the military stockpile, and some weapons have even been recovered.
There are literally hundreds of millions of transactions with respect to small arms in the course of a given year. And of course, we have a very large inventory, several million of these weapons inside the inventory. So I think in the aggregate, we take this very seriously, and we think we do a very good job. That doesn't mean that there aren't losses. It doesn't mean that there aren't mistakes made. It doesn't mean that that we're perfect.
The Pentagon used to share annual updates about stolen weapons with Congress, but the requirement to do so ended years ago, and public accountability has slipped. Albany County District Attorney called this a cycle of devastation.
One gun creates a ton of devastation, and then it puts it on local officials, local law enforcement, to have to work extra hard to try to remove those guns from communities.
Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
It has been close to a month since the fragile truce brokered by Egypt between Israel and Palestine took place. And in a flare-up of tensions, Israel has launched strikes inside Gaza for the second day in a row. Breaking a month-long lull in hostilities, Israel has targeted the Gaza Strip in what they called a retaliatory move. Strikes came after Palestinian territories set off incendiary balloons into southern Israel. The Israeli Air Force has released a statement on the latest strike. They've said that it had attacked what it described as a rocket launch site and military complexes belonging to Hamas, and referenced targets in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. The visuals on your screen show a barrage of machine gun fire in the air. They were seen coming from the Gaza Strip right after Israel fired airstrikes. Rocket sirens went off in Israeli communities near Gaza shortly after the airstrikes. There were no immediate reports of casualties from the strikes, which could be heard from Gaza City. The Israeli Defense Forces issued a statement in which they said they're prepared for all scenarios, including the resumption of hostilities. Tensions were reignited in the region right after the Israeli government gave the green light to the controversial Jerusalem March. Jewish demonstrators poured into Jerusalem's Flashpoint Old City, where scores of police clashed with Palestinians to clear a route for the procession. The attacks take place in the first week of the formation of new government in Israel, led by Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. And amid all this chaos, Israeli Army Chief Kohavi is due to leave Tel Aviv tomorrow for a 6-day visit to the United States. All eyes are on Kohavi's visit to the US for these key talks. He will visit the US military's Central Command in Florida, with items on the agenda to include Gaza's Islamist rulers Hamas. Residents in Japanese cities are angry over the authorities' holding of the Olympic Games in the middle of a pandemic. The feelings have been visible through several polls. While protests on streets have been small, people have now resorted to art as a form of resistance. Take a look.
The athletes are training hard. The venues are going through final checks. The Tokyo Olympics are just a month away. All this while the world is still battling the novel coronavirus. And the Japanese are not too happy with the government hosting the games amidst a pandemic. Multiple polls have shown the Japanese public mostly opposes holding the Tokyo Olympics. While protests on the streets have been fragmented, the Japanese have fallen back on art as a form of protest. These t-shirts read, "Just cancel it." The designer Susumu Kukutake says that the demand for these t-shirts has skyrocketed.
I sold 100 t-shirts in April, which is 10 times higher than usual. In May, 250 shirts. I felt the abrupt change of the atmosphere that people were going against the Olympics.
He says the spike in sales reflect public resentment. Another artist, Miwako Sauchi, uses her painting to express anger. Titled Vortex, her painting reflects the sense of contradiction and fear of residents who were evicted to build Olympic stadiums.
I can no longer consider the Tokyo Olympics as a festival of peace, especially given the current situation of the virus and its variants.
Sachihiro Achi, a social worker and doctor, says that Tokyo and Yokohama cities hardened their policies on the homeless because of Olympics. He says public spaces that were open earlier are now covered. Through his paintings, he illustrates displacement.
I put my thoughts into these paintings as I want more artists to speak up against the games.
T-shirts, drawings and other artworks have become a form of protest for residents in Japanese cities to protest over the decision to hold the games. In some cases, officials have responded by demanding the satiric art and merchandise to be removed. The Tokyo 2020 Organizing Committee has also cited copyright infringement to suppress protests in the form of art. The artists say this curtails their freedom. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Well, that's all we have time for on this edition of WION Live Broadcast. But for more news and global updates, stay tuned to WION. World is One.
Many other. This is right, Arab.
One World Trade Center, that is the one where the impact.
The cause of India's freedom for many years.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr.
America is a constant work in progress.